The sun scorched the cracked asphalt of Dustwater, Arizona, as screams echoed from Main Street. A massive donkey, eyes glowing red like molten coals, charged through the town square, sending terrified locals scrambling for cover. Its hooves sparked against concrete, leaving behind smoldering prints that shouldn't exist in the natural world. Sheriff Martinez backed against his patrol car, hand trembling on his empty gun. The beast had already hospitalized 6 people and destroyed half the storefronts. Nothing could stop it. Bullets bounced off like pebbles, tranquilizer darts snapped in half. Then she appeared. 8-year-old Rosa Santana stepped from behind a Hell Angels motorcycle, her tiny frame dwarfed by leather jackets and chrome. The bikers, her family, watched in stunned silence as she walked toward the demonic creature. What they didn't know was that Rosa carried the blood of curanderas, ancient healers who could speak to spirits both light and dark. The donkey's rampage wasn't random. Something had awakened it, something hungry and old that fed on fear. Rosa's hands began to glow with an ethereal blue light as she approached the beast. But what happens when a child must choose between saving her town and losing her soul forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The possessed donkey turned its burning gaze toward Rosa, and for a moment, the chaos stopped. Mrs. Henderson clutched, her purse behind an overturned fruit stand. Old Pete pressed himself against the barbershop window, his weathered face pale with terror. Even the desert wind seemed to hold its breath. Rosa felt the familiar tingle in her fingertips, the same sensation she'd experienced when touching her grandmother's prayer candles, or when nightmares crept too close to her dreams. Abuela had always warned her about the gift, about how it called to things better left sleeping. But Abuela was gone now, buried 3 months ago under the scorching Arizona sun, taking most of her secrets with her. "Rosa, get back here!" Thunder, the Hell Angels president and the closest thing she had to a father, revved his Harley. The leather-clad bikers formed a protective wall behind her, but even they couldn't hide the fear in their eyes. They'd seen plenty of violence in their time, but nothing like this. The donkey pawed the ground, leaving another smoldering hoofprint. Steam rose from its nostrils, and when it opened its mouth, Rosa glimpsed something that made her stomach lurch. Rows of sharp teeth that no herbivore should possess, glistening with an oily black substance that dripped onto the pavement with a hiss. Rosa had lived in Dustwater her entire short life, moving between her grandmother's adobe house on the outskirts and the Hell Angels compound, when child services came sniffing around. She knew every crack in these streets, every face that now watched her in terror and desperate hope. These people had whispered about her family, crossed themselves when the bikers roared through town, but now she was their only chance. The blue light in her palms pulsed stronger, and with it came the whispers. Not voices exactly, but something deeper, vibrations that traveled through her bones and settled in her heart. They spoke of ancient hungers, of a presence that had slumbered beneath the desert for generations, until something had torn it from its rest. Sheriff Martinez's radio crackled with desperate calls for backup, but Rosa knew help wouldn't arrive in time. The nearest town was 50 miles away across unforgiving desert, and whatever inhabited this donkey grew stronger with each passing moment, feeding on the terror that saturated the air like perfume. She took another step forward, her small sneakers crunching on broken glass from Morales's shattered storefront window. The creature's red eyes tracked her movement, intelligent and malevolent. This wasn't just possession. Something was puppeteering the animal, using it as a vessel to taste the world above ground. "Easy," Rosa whispered, the way her grandmother had taught her to speak to the spirits that lingered in shadows. "I see you." The donkey's ears twitched, and for an instant, Rosa glimpsed the terrified animal trapped beneath the supernatural influence. Its real eyes, brown and gentle, pleaded with her from somewhere deep within the crimson glow. The blue light in Rosa's hands intensified, and she felt something ancient stirring in her bloodline. Knowledge passed down through generations of curanderas who had walked the thin line between salvation and damnation. But power always demanded payment, and the stronger the magic, the steeper the price. Behind her, Thunder's voice cut through the tension. "Whatever you're gonna do, kid, do it fast." Rosa could feel the entity's attention focusing on her like a magnifying glass concentrating sunlight. It recognized what she was, what she carried in her blood. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, promising her strength beyond imagination if she would just open herself completely to its influence. The choice crystallized before her with terrible clarity. She could save Dustwater, save these people who had never fully accepted her or her unconventional family. But doing so might unleash something far worse than a possessed donkey. It might unleash her. The screaming started again just after midnight. Sheriff Maria Santos jerked awake in her patrol car, parked outside the Dusty Rose Motel where 3 families had barricaded themselves after their homes were destroyed. The sound cut through the desert air like broken glass, not humans screaming, but something far worse. The possessed donkey's brays had evolved into something that made her teeth ache and her vision blur at the edges. She grabbed her radio with trembling fingers. "This is Santos. It's active again. Southwest corner of town near the old gas station." Deputy Collins's voice crackled back, tight with fear. "Copy that. Should we—" A crash echoed across the settlement, followed by the distinctive sound of splintering wood. Maria gunned her engine and tore through the empty streets, her headlights carving desperate arcs through the darkness. Behind her, she could hear the rumble of Collins' truck and the volunteer fire department's ancient engine. When she reached Main Street, her heart sank. The creature had gotten into Henderson's hardware store. Through the shattered front window, she could see the impossible silhouette, a donkey the size of a small horse, its eyes burning like twin coals in the darkness. But it moved wrong, joints bending in directions that defied anatomy, and when it turned toward her cruiser, she saw that its mouth had split open too wide, revealing rows of teeth that belonged in a shark's jaw. The thing that had once been Buttercup, the gentlest animal in Perdition Flats, let out another soul-crushing bray and charged straight through the remaining storefront glass. Maria threw the car in reverse, but not fast enough. The creature's hooves connected with her hood, and the impact sent her spinning into a lamppost. Steam hissed from her radiator as she fumbled for her shotgun, knowing it would be useless, but needing something solid in her hands. The possessed donkey circled her disabled vehicle, its breath fogging the windows with an acidic mist that made the glass bubble and warp. Maria could smell sulfur and rotting meat, could hear what sounded like whispered voices speaking in languages that hurt her ears. "Stay in the car!" Collins shouted from somewhere behind her, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. The creature's eyes locked onto hers through the windshield, and suddenly Maria couldn't move, couldn't think, could only stare into that burning gaze as her will drained away like water through a sieve. The donkey reared up on its hind legs, hooves glinting with an oily dark substance that definitely wasn't mud, and Maria closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable. Instead, she heard the roar of motorcycle engines. Her eyes snapped open to see 5 bikes racing down Main Street, their riders hunched low against the handlebars. Even in the chaos, she recognized the distinctive silhouettes of Hell Angels, the leather cuts, the wild hair streaming in their wake, the way they rode like death itself was chasing them. Or maybe they were chasing death. The lead bike swerved around her cruiser, and Maria caught a glimpse of the rider, a young girl who couldn't be more than 12, her blonde hair whipping like a banner in the desert wind. She wore an oversized leather jacket covered in patches and studs, and when she turned her head toward the possessed donkey, Maria saw something in her face that was far older and darker than her years. The girl raised one small hand, and suddenly the air crackled with electricity that had nothing to do with the approaching storm. She spoke a single word that Maria felt more than heard, a word that seemed to bypass her ears entirely and embed itself directly into her brain like a splinter. The donkey froze mid-charge, its terrible eyes widening. For a moment, the two faced each other, child and monster, in perfect stillness. Then the creature threw back its head and screamed, a sound of pure rage and frustration that shattered every remaining window on the block. But it backed away. The girl revved her engine and said something else, her voice carrying despite the motorcycle's rumble. This time Maria caught fragments. "Not yours to take. Return to the deep places. By the old laws I bind you." The donkey's form began to shimmer and distort, like heat mirages rising from summer asphalt. For just an instant Maria saw something else superimposed over the animal, a shadow with too many limbs and eyes like burning pits. Then both images collapsed together, and Buttercup stood there looking confused and entirely normal, except for the destruction surrounding her. The girl cut her engine and dismounted, walking slowly toward the bewildered donkey. She reached out one hand, and Buttercup nuzzled her palm with gentle affection. "There," the child said softly. "It's over." But Maria, watching from her steaming patrol car, saw the way the other Hell Angels looked at their young companion, with a mixture of awe and terror that suggested this was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. The possessed donkey's braying echoed through the dawn air like a siren from hell itself. Sheriff Martinez crouched behind his patrol car, watching the creature demolish what remained of Henderson's fruit stand. Splinters of wood and crushed oranges painted the street in a grotesque still life. "How many rounds you got left, Sheriff?" Deputy Collins whispered, his voice trembling. Martinez checked his service weapon. 6. "You?" 4. Collins swallowed hard. "Think it's enough?" Before Martinez could answer, the donkey's head snapped toward them, its eyes blazing with an otherworldly crimson light. The animal that had once carried supplies for old Miguel now stood nearly 7 feet tall, its hooves crackling with dark energy that left scorch marks on the asphalt. "It knows we're here," Martinez breathed. The creature began its approach, each step deliberate and predatory. But then the rumble of motorcycle engines cut through the morning stillness. A convoy of black Harleys rounded the corner, their riders clad in leather bearing the distinctive winged skull patches of the Hell Angels. The donkey paused, tilting its massive head as if considering this new development. Steam rose from its nostrils like sulfur from a volcano. Leading the pack was Tank Morrison, his weathered face grim beneath his helmet. Behind him rode 6 other angels, but it was the small figure on the final bike that drew every eye. The child couldn't have been more than 12, yet she handled the massive motorcycle with supernatural ease. Her dark hair whipped in the wind, and even from a distance, Martinez could see her eyes held the same unsettling depth as storm clouds. The convoy pulled up in formation, engines growling before falling silent in unison. Tank dismounted first, his boots hitting the ground with authority. "Sheriff," he called out, never taking his eyes off the possessed creature. "Time to step aside." "Tank, what the hell is going on here?" Martinez emerged from behind the patrol car, his weapon still drawn but lowered. "This thing's already killed 2 people. 3, the child corrected, sliding off her bike with fluid grace. Her voice carried an odd resonance, as if multiple people were speaking in perfect harmony. Mrs. Peterson didn't make it through the night. Martinez felt ice form in his stomach. He'd sent an ambulance for the elderly woman after finding her unconscious in her garden, but the paramedics had said she'd be fine. "How could you possibly know that?" Collins demanded, raising his weapon toward the girl. 6 Hell Angels immediately drew their own guns, the metallic clicks echoing like deadly percussion. Tank held up a hand, and his men froze but didn't lower their weapons. "Easy, Deputy," Tank said, his tone carrying the weight of barely controlled violence. "The girl knows things. Accept it and move on, or this gets complicated real fast." The possessed donkey released another bone-chilling bray, drawing everyone's attention back to the primary threat. It had grown larger still, now nearly 8 feet tall and crackling with malevolent energy. The asphalt beneath its hooves had begun to bubble and melt. "It's feeding," the child observed, approaching the creature with impossible calm. "Every moment of terror, every drop of spilled blood makes it stronger. Soon it won't need the host body at all." "What are you talking about?" Martinez demanded. "What host body?" The girl turned to face him, and for a moment her young features seemed to shift and blur, revealing something ancient and terrible beneath. The demon's goal isn't possession, Sheriff. It's incarnation. Once it gathers enough fear and death, it can manifest its true form in this realm. And if that happens? Collins asked, though his expression suggested he didn't want to know the answer. Your little town becomes ground zero for something that makes this look like a petting zoo mishap, Tank growled. Which is why we're here. The donkey suddenly charged, moving with inhuman speed despite its massive size. Martinez dove left while Collins rolled right, both men scrambling for cover. The Hell Angels scattered with practiced efficiency, but the child stood perfectly still. The creature bore down on her, hooves throwing sparks, jaws opened wide enough to reveal rows of shark-like teeth that definitely didn't belong in any earthly animal. At the last possible second, the girl raised her small hand. The donkey struck an invisible barrier and rebounded, tumbling backward in a tangle of limbs and fury. When it regained its footing, the crimson glow in its eyes had intensified to the point where looking directly at them caused physical pain. Interesting, the child mused, examining her palm as if checking for injury. It's stronger than the one in Phoenix. Someone's been feeding it for weeks. Feeding it what? Martinez called from behind an overturned pickup truck. The girl's smile was older than her years and cold as winter starlight. Souls, Sheriff. Someone in your town has been feeding it souls. The possessed donkey pawed the melting asphalt and prepared for another charge, while overhead, storm clouds began gathering despite the clear morning sky. The child's eyes gleamed like polished obsidian as she stepped into the flickering lamplight of Mama Rodriguez's cantina. Her leather jacket, several sizes too large, bore the unmistakable winged skull patch of the Hell Angels, though the oil stains and road dust suggested it had seen countless miles of desert highway. "You called for help," she said, her voice carrying an authority that seemed impossible for someone who couldn't be older than 12. "But you might not like what I'm offering." Sheriff Martinez felt his hand instinctively drift toward his service weapon, then thought better of it. The stories about the Hell Angels weren't just about their motorcycles or their reputation for violence. There were darker tales, whispered in the same breath as warnings about traveling certain stretches of highway after midnight. "What's your name, kid?" Martinez asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Luna." She pulled off fingerless gloves that revealed hands covered in intricate tattoos, symbols that seemed to writhe in the lamplight. "And before you ask, yes, I know about your donkey problem. The whole desert knows by now." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. "How could you possibly know about—" "Because I can smell the sulfur from here," Luna interrupted. "Demon possession leaves a stink that travels for miles if you know what you're looking for." She wrinkled her nose. "Amateur job, too. Whoever summoned that thing didn't know how to properly bind it." The cantina fell silent except for the distant sound of sirens and the occasional crash from whatever the possessed donkey was destroying next. Through the window, they could see the orange glow of fires spreading through the eastern part of town. "Summoned?" Father Miguel's voice cracked. "You're saying someone deliberately brought this evil to Esperanza?" Luna shrugged. "Demons don't just randomly hop into farm animals for fun. Someone opened a door and didn't bother to install proper locks." She surveyed the room, taking in the frightened faces of the townspeople. "Question is, do you want me to close it or not?" "What's the catch?" Martinez found himself asking, though part of him didn't want to hear the answer. A smile played at the corners of Luna's mouth, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Smart man. The catch is that banishing a demon requires a trade. Something of equal value has to take its place in the void." Dr. Chen frowned. "That doesn't make scientific sense. You can't just trade matter for—" "This isn't about science, lady." Luna's tone carried a patience usually reserved for explaining things to very small children. "This is about balance. The universe doesn't like empty spaces, especially ones torn open by amateurs playing with forces they don't understand." Father Miguel stepped forward, his weathered hands clasped tightly around his rosary. "What kind of trade are we talking about?" "A life," Luna said simply. "Someone in this town has to volunteer to cross over. Their soul goes into the void, the demon gets pulled back to whatever hell it crawled out of, and your donkey goes back to being a regular pain in the ass instead of a supernatural one." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Outside, something exploded, and the lights flickered. Through the window, they could see the donkey silhouetted against the flames, its eyes glowing red as it kicked in the door of the hardware store. "That's murder," Martinez said finally. "No," Luna corrected. "Murder is what that thing is going to do to every person in this town if we don't stop it. This is a choice, a sacrifice." She pulled a worn leather pouch from her jacket. "I've got everything we need for the ritual except the volunteer." Mama Rodriguez, who had been silent throughout the exchange, suddenly spoke up. "How do we know you're telling the truth? How do we know you're not just some crazy kid playing dress-up?" Luna opened the leather pouch and pulled out what looked like a compass made of blackened bone and silver wire. The needle spun wildly before pointing directly toward the sound of destruction outside. As they watched, symbols carved into the bone began to glow with a sickly green light. "Because," Luna said, "this thing has been in my family for 6 generations, and every single one of them has used it to clean up messes just like this one." She looked up at them, and for a moment, the weight of inherited knowledge and terrible responsibility showed in her young face. "The Hell Angels aren't just a motorcycle club. We're the cleanup crew for when people mess with things they shouldn't." The building shook as something massive struck the wall outside. Dust rained from the ceiling, and several people cried out in fear. "So," Luna continued, tucking the compass away, "who's it going to be? Because that thing is getting stronger every minute, and pretty soon even a willing sacrifice won't be enough to stop it." The child's laughter echoed through the abandoned gas station as she traced patterns in the dust with her bare toe. Sheriff Martinez watched from the doorway, his hand instinctively resting on his service weapon, though he knew bullets would be useless against whatever forces were at play here. "You don't trust me," the girl said without looking up from her dusty artwork. Her voice carried an odd musical quality, like wind chimes made of bone. "Smart man." "Give me a reason to," Martinez replied, stepping closer. In the harsh fluorescent light, he could see the intricate tattoos that spiraled down her arms weren't ink at all, but some kind of scarification that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. The girl, who still hadn't given her name, tilted her head toward the broken windows facing Main Street. "Listen." In the distance, the possessed donkey's braying had taken on a different tone. Where before it had been filled with rage and inhuman hunger, now it carried something else, pain, confusion, as if whatever had taken hold of the animal was beginning to lose its grip. "The binding is weakening," she explained, finally meeting his eyes, "but not because of anything you've done. It's because I'm here. The entity knows I can send it back, and it's getting desperate." Martinez felt a chill despite the desert heat. Desperate how? Before she could answer, Deputy Collins burst through the gas station door, his face flushed and breathing hard. "Sheriff, we've got a problem. The thing, it's not alone anymore." The girl's expression shifted to something that might have been concern, or perhaps anticipation. "Show me." They followed Collins to his patrol car, where his radio crackled with frantic reports from the remaining deputies. Through the static, Martinez could make out fragments of increasingly disturbing news. The donkey had somehow gathered other animals, stray dogs, a few remaining horses from the Parker Ranch, even the old tomcat from the hardware store, all of them moving with the same unnatural coordination, their eyes reflecting that same sickly green light. "It's building an army," the girl said matter-of-factly, as if commenting on the weather. "That's what they do when they feel cornered. Spread the possession to anything with enough life force to sustain the connection." Martinez grabbed her shoulder, feeling how thin and fragile she seemed beneath his grip. "You said you could stop this. When?" "When the price is paid." Her voice had gone flat, emotionless. Everything has a cost, Sheriff. The entity that's taken your town hostage, it feeds on suffering, on fear, on the slow dissolution of hope. To send it back, someone has to offer something it values more, which is innocence. She pulled away from his grasp and walked toward the patrol car. Pure, untainted innocence. The kind that can only come from someone who's never made a choice between good and evil because they've never had to. The radio erupted with screaming. Deputy Hanson's voice, high and panicked, reported that the possessed animals had begun attacking the shelter where the evacuated townspeople were hiding. The sound cut off abruptly, replaced by static. "We're out of time," Martinez said, reaching for his keys. "No." The girl's hand shot out, impossibly fast, and caught his wrist. Her grip was cold as winter's stone. "If you go there now, you'll just give it more bodies to work with, more fear to feed on. The only way to end this is to call it to us." Collins stepped back, his hand moving to his weapon. "What are you?" The girl smiled, and for a moment her face looked exactly like what she appeared to be, a lost child in need of protection. Then the expression shifted, revealing something ancient and terrible underneath. "I'm what happens when the Hell Angels find something they can't fix with chrome and gasoline," she said. "I'm what my father made me into when he decided his baby girl should never have to choose between heaven and hell." She began walking toward Main Street, her bare feet making no sound on the broken asphalt. "He bound my soul before I could sin, before I could fall. Made me into something that exists between worlds, the perfect bait for things like this." Martinez and Collins followed, drawn by a compulsion neither could explain. The town around them had taken on an otherworldly quality, shadows moving independently of their sources, the air itself seeming to thicken with malevolent presence. "The ritual will require an anchor," the girl continued, her voice carrying clearly despite the growing supernatural wind. "Someone to hold the connection while I cross over, someone willing to share the burden of what comes next." In the distance, they could see the possessed animals gathering at the far end of Main Street, dozens of them now, all standing perfectly still, waiting. At their center stood the donkey, its eyes blazing like twin suns. Burden?" Martinez asked. Though part of him already knew he wouldn't like the answer. The girl turned to face him, and he saw his own damnation reflected in her two knowing eyes. The burden of choosing who gets to keep their soul. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty Main Street as Sarah crept toward the abandoned gas station where the girl waited. The entire town held its breath, windows shuttered, doors barred. Even the usual desert wind had stilled, as if nature itself feared what was coming. The child sat cross-legged on the cracked concrete, her small frame dwarfed by the rusted hulk of an old pickup truck. She couldn't have been more than 10. With tangled dark hair and eyes that seemed far too old for her face. The Hell Angels patch on her oversized leather vest was faded but unmistakable, a grinning skull wreathed in flames. "You came," the girl said without looking up. Her voice carried an odd echo, as if spoken from the bottom of a well. Sarah stopped 20 feet away, her hand instinctively moving to the cross at her throat. "What's your name?" "Names have power. You can call me Raven." The child finally raised her head, and Sarah fought the urge to step back. Those weren't a 10-year-old's eyes staring at her. They were ancient, weary, tinged with something that might have been sorrow. "The donkey," Sarah began, then stopped. In daylight, speaking about a possessed animal to a child seemed absurd. But the memory of last night's terror was too fresh, too real. "Balaam," Raven said simply. "That's what the thing inside him calls itself. Biblical, you know. The angel who made a donkey speak." She stood with fluid grace, brushing dust from her jeans. "Except this one's no angel." A distant bray echoed across the desert, and both females turned toward the sound. Sarah's blood chilled as she spotted movement near the old church, a grey shape pouring at the ground, its eyes reflecting red even in daylight. "It knows we're here," Raven whispered. "It can smell the deal coming." "What deal?" Sarah's voice cracked. "What exactly are you asking of us?" Raven walked to the gas pump, her fingers trailing along the sun-bleached metal. Demons are like parasites. They need a host, but they prefer willing ones. This Balaam, it's been trapped in that donkey for decades, growing stronger, hungrier. Soon it'll be powerful enough to jump to human hosts. The grey donkey stepped into full view, and Sarah gasped. It was massive now, easily twice the size of a normal animal. Its hide rippled with unnatural muscle, and when it opened its mouth, rows of needle-sharp teeth gleamed like broken glass. "Jesus Christ," Sarah breathed. "He can't help you here," Raven said matter-of-factly. "Holy ground means nothing to something this old, but I can bind it, send it back where it belongs." She paused, studying her dirt-caked fingernails. "For a price. Money? We don't have much, but—" "Not money." Raven's laugh was bitter, hollow. "I need a soul debt. Someone in this town has to owe me willingly. Someone pure enough to matter, tainted enough to be useful." Sarah's throat constricted. "You want my soul?" "Not yours specifically, but someone's. The binding requires it. Old magic, older than your Bible, older than civilization." Raven turned to face her fully. "One soul, freely given, and I can send Balaam screaming back to the pit. Your town lives, your people are safe." The possessed donkey began moving toward them with deliberate slowness, each hoofstep ringing like a funeral bell against the concrete. Its red eyes never left Sarah's face. "And if we refuse?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then by tomorrow night, there won't be enough living people in this town to fill a phone booth." Raven's expression remained neutral, as if discussing the weather. "Balaam's done this before. Carthage, Pompeii, Salem, always starting small, always growing, always hungry." Sarah's mind raced. Father Miguel was still in the hospital. The sheriff had barricaded himself in his office and wasn't taking calls. The highway out of town remained mysteriously impassable. Every car that tried to leave simply appeared back at the town limits with no memory of turning around. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Sarah demanded. "How do I know you're not just another demon trying to trick us?" For the first time, genuine emotion flickered across Raven's features. Hurt, maybe even vulnerability. "Because, lady, I used to be just like you. Small town, big faith, thought good always triumphed." She pulled back her sleeve, revealing intricate scars carved into her forearm. "I learned different, but I also learned how to fight back." The donkey was 50 yards away now, close enough that Sarah could hear its labored breathing, like steam escaping from a broken radiator. Its presence made her skin crawl, filled her mouth with the taste of copper and decay. "Decide quickly," Raven urged. "Once it gets within striking distance, the choice won't be yours anymore. Balaam will take what it wants, and your town becomes another historical footnote." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of every life in Cedar Falls pressing down on her shoulders like stones. The diner fell silent, except for the rhythmic ticking of the old wall clock and the distant rumble of thunder that had nothing to do with weather. Luna's small fingers traced patterns on the cracked formica table, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. The Hell Angel's leather jacket draped over her shoulders looked impossibly large, like she was playing dress-up in her father's clothes. "The donkey ain't the real problem," she said finally, her voice carrying an ancient weight that didn't belong to someone barely past childhood. "It's what's riding inside it." Sheriff Martinez leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped tight. "What do you mean, riding inside?" Luna's pale eyes met his, and for a moment Martinez saw something that made his blood run cold. This wasn't just a kid who'd grown up too fast on the margins of society. This was something else entirely. "My daddy, he taught me about the old things before the cancer took him. Said knowledge was the only inheritance worth leaving." She pulled the jacket tighter around her shoulders. "That donkey, Ezekiel, he's got a passenger now, something that crawled up from the deep places when the stars aligned wrong last month." Doc Henderson, who'd been quietly nursing his coffee in the corner booth, suddenly straightened. "The lunar eclipse. 3 weeks ago. You noticed." Luna's smile held no warmth. "Most folks just saw a pretty light show, but some of us, we know what happens when the barriers get thin." Outside, a car alarm began wailing, then cut off abruptly. Through the diner's grimy windows, they could see people hurrying down Main Street, glancing nervously over their shoulders. The creature that had once been Ezekiel was out there somewhere in the growing darkness, and the whole town could feel it like a splinter under the skin. "So, how do we get this thing out?" Martinez asked, though part of him already dreaded the answer. Luna reached into the inner pocket of her jacket and pulled out a small leather pouch tied with what looked like human hair. The smell that wafted from it made everyone in the diner instinctively lean back, something between sulfur and rotting flowers. Binding ritual, old as dirt and twice as nasty. She set the pouch on the table with the reverence of someone handling live ammunition. "But here's the thing about demons, Sheriff. They don't just go quietly. You want to cast something out, you got to give it somewhere else to go." The implications hit Martinez like a physical blow. A host. Someone willing to take it on, yeah. Someone strong enough to contain it until it can be sent back to where it belongs. Luna's fingers drummed against the table. Problem is, most folks ain't built for that kind of passenger. It'd burn through an ordinary person in minutes. Doc Henderson stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum. "This is insane. You're talking about deliberately possessing someone. There has to be another way." "Sure there is." Luna's voice carried a bitter edge. "You can let it keep riding that poor animal until it gets bored. Course, by then, half your town will be dead and the other half will be wishing they were." As if summoned by her words, a distant sound reached them, somewhere between a bray and a scream, echoing off the desert hills. The lights in the diner flickered, and the coffee in Martinez's cup began to ripple in concentric circles. "It's getting stronger," Luna observed with clinical detachment, "feeding off the fear, the chaos. Give it another day or two, and it won't need Ezekiel anymore. It'll be able to manifest on its own." Martinez felt the weight of his badge like a stone in his chest. 30 years of law enforcement, and nothing had prepared him for this. But looking around at the faces of his neighbors, people he'd sworn to protect, he knew there wasn't really a choice. What would this ritual require? Luna opened the pouch, revealing what looked like bone fragments carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Full moon's tomorrow night. We'd need to get close enough to touch the host, the donkey, and we'd need someone willing to take the demon on. How long would they have to carry it?" 3 days. Long enough to weaken it with the binding spells, then send it back through the gateway. She paused, studying Martinez's face. "But I got to tell you, Sheriff, even if everything goes perfect, the host won't come out of it unchanged. This kind of thing, it leaves marks on your soul." The diner fell silent again, each person lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and carrying with it the scent of something burning. In the distance, that terrible sound came again, closer this time. Martinez looked at Luna, this strange child who spoke of demons like other kids talked about homework, and made his decision. The first thing Maya noticed when she woke was the silence. Not the kind that came before dawn in the desert, but something deeper, a hollow quiet that made her skin crawl. She sat up on the thin mattress Father Miguel had provided in the church basement, her leather jacket still wrapped around her shoulders like armor. Above her, she could hear hushed voices filtering through the floorboards. The townsfolk were gathering early, their whispers carrying the weight of desperation. 3 more attacks had happened during the night. The Ramirez family's vegetable stand had been trampled to splinters, their month's earnings scattered like confetti across Main Street. Old Henrik's water pump had been destroyed, leaving half the town without access to the precious well. Worst of all, little Tommy Chen was in the clinic with a broken arm after the beast had cornered him behind the school. Maya pulled her knees to her chest, feeling the familiar weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. They all looked at her the same way now, like she was some kind of savior wrapped in black leather and teenage rebellion. If only they knew the truth about what stopping the donkey would really cost. She'd seen it in her dreams again last night, the ritual circle, the ancient words that tasted like copper and ash when spoken aloud. The moment when she would have to choose between saving Salvation Falls and preserving what remained of her humanity. Footsteps creaked on the basement stairs, and Father Miguel appeared with a steaming cup of coffee and a plate of eggs that looked like they'd seen better days. His usually kind face was etched with worry lines that seemed to have deepened overnight. "The Martinez boy came by this morning," he said, settling into the rickety chair beside her makeshift bed. "Says he saw the creature heading toward the elementary school just before sunrise." Maya's blood ran cold. Were there kids there? Janitor scared it off with a shotgun blast. "But Maya," he paused, studying her face in the dim basement light. "People are starting to panic. Really panic. There's talk of abandoning the town entirely." She took a sip of the bitter coffee, using the heat to ground herself in the present moment. "Would that be such a bad thing?" "For some, maybe not. But families like the Garcias have been here for 4 generations. This isn't just their home. It's their heritage, their identity. And the elderly folks, the ones who can't just pack up and start over." He shook his head. "They'll die out there in the desert before they find somewhere new to call home." Maya set down the cup, her hands trembling slightly. She'd been 15 when her grandfather first showed her the old texts hidden in his saddlebags, ancient knowledge passed down through generations of hell angels, secrets that predated the motorcycle club by centuries. Her bloodline carried more than just a talent for machines and a disregard for authority. It carried the ability to bind and banish entities that didn't belong in the mortal realm. But every binding required a sacrifice. Always. "There's something I need to tell you," she said quietly, "about how to stop the donkey, about what it's going to cost." Father Miguel leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped tightly together. "I figured there would be a price. There always is, when dealing with forces beyond our understanding." Maya stood and walked to the small basement window, peering out at the dusty street above. A few early risers were already moving about, their movements quick and nervous, eyes constantly scanning for danger. The entity possessing the donkey is not just some random demon that wandered in from the desert. It's a bound spirit, something that was deliberately summoned and then lost control of. The person who called it is probably long dead, but the binding is still partially intact. What does that mean? It means I can break the connection, send it back where it came from. But breaking a binding that strong, that old... She turned back to face him, her young face carrying a weight that shouldn't belong to someone her age. It requires a soul to take its place in the binding circle. Someone has to stay behind to hold the door closed from the other side. The silence that followed felt like a physical thing, pressing down on both of them with suffocating weight. "How long?" Father Miguel asked finally. "Forever." He closed his eyes, and Maya could see him wrestling with the implications. One life to save hundreds. A teenager's future sacrificed to preserve an entire community's existence. "There has to be another way," he said. Maya had spent 3 sleepless nights, hoping he was right, scouring every page of her grandfather's journals, following every thread of possibility. But the math was brutally simple. The entity was too strong, too deeply rooted, to be banished by conventional means. "I've already made my choice," she said softly. "The question is whether you'll help me do it right, or if I'll have to try it alone." Outside, a child's scream pierced the morning air, followed by the thunderous sound of hooves on pavement. The donkey had found new prey. The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned gas station where Marcus had arranged to meet the Hell Angels. His hands trembled as he checked his watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. Behind him, Sheriff Rodriguez paced nervously, her boots crunching on broken glass and desert sand that had blown through the shattered windows. "You sure about this?" Rodriguez whispered, though her voice carried in the empty space. "These aren't the kind of people you negotiate with, Marcus. They take what they want." Before he could respond, the distant rumble of motorcycle engines echoed across the desert. The sound grew louder, more menacing, until it seemed to shake the very foundations of the decrepit building. Through the heat shimmer rising from the asphalt, dark figures materialized like demons emerging from hell itself. 12 motorcycles roared into the station's lot, their riders clad in black leather despite the scorching heat. The lead bike, a massive Harley with skull-adorned handlebars, came to a stop mere feet from where Marcus stood. The engine's growl died, leaving only the tick of cooling metal and the whisper of desert wind. The rider removed his helmet, revealing a weathered face marked by scars and a lifetime of hard choices. Tattoos crawled up his neck like serpents, and his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator. This had to be Reaper, the club's president that everyone spoke of in hushed, fearful tones. "You the one who's been asking about my daughter?" Reaper's voice was gravel and smoke, each word deliberate and threatening. Marcus stepped forward, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to run. "My name is Marcus Chen. I'm the mayor of Salvation Ridge, and yes, we need to talk about your daughter." A laugh rippled through the assembled bikers, but Reaper raised his hand and silence fell instantly. He dismounted slowly, his leather jacket creaking. Up close, Marcus could see the club's patches, Hell Angels arched across broad shoulders, President beneath it, and various other symbols that spoke of violence and brotherhood. "My Lily doesn't concern civilians," Reaper said, stepping closer. "Whatever business you think you have with her ends now. Your daughter is the only one who can stop what's happening in our town." Marcus pressed on, his voice steadier than he felt. "People are dying. Children are afraid to leave their homes. And it's all because of something that's been unleashed there." Rodriguez moved to Marcus's side, her hand resting on her weapon. The bikers noticed immediately, several of them shifting their weight, hands moving toward concealed weapons of their own. "Sheriff," one of them called out mockingly, "you planning to arrest us all?" "Nobody needs to get arrested today," Rodriguez replied evenly. "We're here to talk, nothing more." Reaper's gaze flicked between them, assessing, calculating. After a long moment, he nodded toward the gas station's office. "Inside. Just you, Mayor. The cop stays out here with my boys." Marcus felt Rodriguez tense beside him. "I don't think—" "It's okay," Marcus said quietly. "Give us 10 minutes." The office was a tomb of dust and decay. Reaper closed the door and leaned against it, arms crossed. In the dim light filtering through grimy windows, his scars seemed deeper, more pronounced. "Start talking," he commanded. Marcus took a breath and began. He told Reaper about the donkey, about the deaths and the terror gripping Salvation Ridge. He described the supernatural elements, the way normal weapons proved useless, the growing desperation of his people. Throughout it all, Reaper's expression remained unreadable. "And you think my little girl can fix this?" Reaper asked when Marcus finished. "I think she's connected to it somehow. The timing of her arrival, the way she knew things about the creature." Marcus hesitated. "There's something special about her, isn't there?" For the first time, something flickered in Reaper's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or fear. "Lily's been through more than any kid should," he said finally. "Her mother, let's just say she wasn't entirely human, left me with a daughter who sees things, knows things she shouldn't. The club protects her, but we can't protect her from what's inside her." "What do you mean?" Reaper pushed off from the door, moving to the window. Outside, the two groups maintained their uneasy standoff. Every time she uses whatever gift she's got, it costs her, takes something away, makes her more like her mother and less like— He trailed off. "Less like what?" "Less human." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "You're asking me to let my daughter damn herself to save your town?" Marcus felt the weight of that revelation settle on his shoulders. How much would it cost her? To stop something as powerful as what you're describing? Reaper turned back to face him. Everything. The silence stretched between them, heavy with impossible choices and the distant sound of approaching thunder, though no clouds marred the desert sky. The first scream pierced the pre-dawn darkness like a rusted blade through silk. Maya bolted upright in the motel bed, her heart hammering against her ribs as the sound echoed across the empty parking lot. She'd been dreaming of fire again, of the ritual circle and the terrible thing that lived behind Jasper's eyes. But this scream was real. Another cry followed, then another, until the night air vibrated with terror. Through the thin motel walls, she could hear doors slamming, engines roaring to life, and the unmistakable thunder of hooves on asphalt growing closer. "He's broken free," Maya whispered to the darkness. The salt circle around her bed remained intact, its white crystals gleaming in the moonlight streaming through the blinds. But beyond this fragile sanctuary, redemption was burning. Maya pressed her face to the window and watched Hell Angels' motorcycles streak past like metal comets, their riders shouting orders she couldn't quite catch over the chaos. Red and orange light danced across the desert landscape as buildings caught fire. In the distance, a familiar silhouette rampaged through the town square, larger now than before, its eyes twin furnaces in the night. The possession was spreading. She could feel it like a fever in her bones, the demon's influence seeping beyond Jasper into the very ground beneath the town. Soon it would reach the boundaries she'd tried so desperately to maintain. Her bedroom door rattled on its hinges as heavy boots approached. "Maya!" The voice belonged to Tank, rough with desperation. "We need you out here now!" She couldn't leave the circle. Not yet. The protection ritual required her to remain within its bounds until sunrise, or risk becoming the demon's next vessel. But outside, people were dying. "The binding isn't holding," she called through the door. "I told you the iron wouldn't be enough. Half the town's on fire. Whatever you're doing in there, it ain't working." Maya closed her eyes and felt for the threads of power she'd woven around Jasper's pen hours earlier. They were fraying like old rope, snapping one by one under the demon's relentless assault. She'd known this would happen. The binding was meant to buy time, not provide a permanent solution. A child's cry cut through the night, high and terrified. Maya's eyes snapped open. That wasn't part of the plan. Civilians were supposed to be evacuated hours ago. She reached for the leather satchel beside her bed and pulled out the final component she'd been dreading to use, a vial of black sand from the crossroads where she'd first learned her grandmother's true name, the sand that would let her walk between worlds, but might not let her return. "Maya, please," Tank's voice cracked with exhaustion. "He's heading for the elementary school. There's kids trapped in there." The salt circle suddenly felt less like protection and more like a prison. Maya stared at the vial, watching the dark grains shift like tiny living things. Once she broke the circle, once she stepped beyond its safety, she would be vulnerable to the demon's influence. But she was the only one who knew the words that could send it back to the depths. Another building exploded in the distance, painting the sky the color of fresh blood. The demon's laughter rolled across the desert like thunder, and Maya felt it in her teeth, her bones, the spaces between her thoughts where fear lived. She uncorked the vial. The black sand hissed as it hit the white salt, creating gaps in her protective barrier. Immediately, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost began forming on the windows as something vast and hungry turned its attention toward her. Maya stepped through the broken circle and felt the demon's presence slam into her mind like a sledgehammer. Images flooded her consciousness, Jasper's memories twisted into nightmares, the town burning, children screaming, and beneath it all, a voice like grinding glass promising her power beyond imagining if she would only surrender. She bit down on her tongue until she tasted blood, using the pain to anchor herself to reality. The copper tang helped her remember who she was, why she was here, what she had to do. Tank was waiting in the hallway, his leather jacket singed and his face streaked with soot. Behind him stood 3 other Hell Angels, their expressions grim in the flickering light of distant flames. They looked at her with a mixture of hope and terror, as if she were either their salvation or their doom. Perhaps she was both. "The school?" Maya asked. 6 blocks north. Roofs already caught fire. Maya nodded and walked past them toward the motel exit. With each step, the demon's whispers grew louder, more insistent. It knew she was coming. It was waiting. She pushed open the door and stepped into the apocalyptic night. The air tasted of smoke and sulfur, and somewhere in the distance, a possessed donkey was laughing at the stars. The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned gas station where they'd taken shelter for the night. Maya sat cross-legged on the cracked concrete, her small hands tracing intricate patterns in the dust while muttering words in a language that made Father Martinez's skin crawl. The priest clutched his rosary, watching the child with a mixture of fear and fascination. "She's been at it for hours," Sheriff Coleman whispered, approaching with 2 steaming cups of coffee from the camp stove they'd salvaged. "Haven't seen her sleep once." Martinez accepted the cup gratefully, the warmth a small comfort against the desert chill. Children touched by the other side rarely need rest as we understand it. Their energy comes from elsewhere. Through the broken windows, they could see the town of Perdition in the distance, smoke still rising from yesterday's destruction. The possessed donkey had torn through Main Street like a force of nature, its braying echoing across the desert with an otherworldly fury that had shattered windows and sent the remaining townspeople fleeing into the wasteland. "My people will come looking for me soon," Maya said, without looking up from her ritual circle. Her voice carried an eerie calm that belonged to someone far older. "They don't like losing their assets." Coleman set down his coffee with shaking hands. "The Hell Angels? Here? They're not just bikers, Sheriff." Maya finally raised her eyes, and for a moment they seemed to glow within a fire. "They serve older masters, ones who've been waiting a very long time for doors to open between worlds. I was supposed to be their key." Martinez felt a chill deeper than the morning air. "Supposed to be?" A bitter smile crossed the child's face. "They made a mistake when they chose me. They thought they were getting a vessel, but I'm something else entirely, something that remembers what came before." The sound of engines rumbled across the desert, distant but growing closer. Coleman grabbed his binoculars, scanning the horizon until he found them, a convoy of motorcycles creating dust clouds as they raced toward Perdition. Even at this distance, he could count at least a dozen riders, their leather jackets gleaming black in the sunlight. "They're heading for the town," he reported, lowering the binoculars. "Moving fast." Maya stood, brushing dust from her clothes. The symbols she'd drawn in the dirt began to smolder and fade. "They'll try to reclaim the donkey first. It's their anchor point, their way of keeping the breach stable." "Breach?" Martinez stepped closer, his theological training warring with the evidence of his own eyes. "You mean there really is a tear in reality, yes." Maya walked to her backpack, pulling out items that had no business being in a child's possession. Crystals that pulsed with inner light, bones carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly, and a knife whose blade seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. "The donkey isn't possessed by some random demon, Father. It's hosting a guardian, something ancient that was set to watch over a prison that should never have been opened." The engines grew louder. Coleman could make out individual bikes now, their riders moving with military precision toward the town center where yesterday they'd last seen the creature. What kind of prison? The kind that holds things the universe tried very hard to forget. Maya secured the knife to her belt, its weight seeming impossibly heavy for someone her size. "My handlers thought they could control what came through, use it to remake the world according to their vision. They were wrong." A new sound joined the rumble of motorcycles, a braying that seemed to come from the earth itself, filled with rage and something that might have been pain. The possessed donkey was responding to the approaching Hell Angels, and even from miles away they could feel its fury washing over them like a physical force. "What's the plan?" Coleman checked his service weapon, though he suspected bullets would be largely useless against what they were facing. "We can't just let them have it." Maya shouldered her pack, looking far too young for the weight of knowledge she carried. "The plan is to give them exactly what they want, but not in the way they expect. They want their guardian back? Fine. But first I'm going to show them what happens when you try to cage something that was meant to be free." She started walking toward town, her small figure somehow commanding despite her size. "The price I mentioned before, the one you'd all have to pay? It's not what you think. It's not about damnation or sacrifice in the way you understand it." Martinez and Coleman hurried to catch up, their equipment jingling as they moved. "Then what is it?" Maya paused, looking back at them with eyes that held depths no child should possess. It's about accepting that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. And sometimes, the only way to protect the world is to become the thing standing guard in the darkness. The sound of engines and unearthly braying grew louder, calling them toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of more than just one small desert town. The desert wind carried the scent of sulfur and burnt sage as Luna knelt beside the ancient circle carved into the hardpan behind Mexicali Joe's. Her small fingers traced the weathered symbols that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy in the dying light. The possessed donkey's braying echoed from somewhere in the town below, followed by the crash of splintering wood and terrified screams. "You sure about this, kid?" Diesel's gravelly voice cut through the evening air. The massive biker stood at the circle's edge, his Hell Angels vest hanging loose over bandaged ribs. 3 other club members flanked him, their faces grim masks of uncertainty and fear. Luna didn't look up from her work. "The binding ritual is the only way, but once I start, there's no stopping it." Her voice carried an eerie calm that made the grown men shift uncomfortably. "And someone has to pay the price." Sheriff Martinez emerged from the shadows, his uniform torn and dust-covered from the day's chaos. What kind of price? His hand rested on his holstered weapon, though they all knew bullets were useless against what they faced. The child finally raised her head, and in the fading sunlight, her eyes seemed to hold depths that belonged to someone much older. The demon that's riding that animal, it feeds on pain, on the suffering it causes. To banish it back to where it came from, someone has to take its place. Someone has to cross over. A heavy silence fell over the group. In the distance, another crash echoed through the desert air, followed by Old Pete's voice shouting directions to the remaining townsfolk who were still trying to evacuate. "Cross over where?" Diesel's voice was barely above a whisper. Luna began arranging the collection of items she'd gathered: a rusted horseshoe, a handful of graveyard dirt, 3 black candles, and something wrapped in oiled cloth that none of them wanted to examine too closely, to the place between places, where the demons wait. She struck a match, its flame dancing unnaturally in the still air. It's not death exactly, but it's not life either. The donkey's braying grew louder, more frenzied. Through the growing darkness, they could see an orange glow rising from the town's main street. Something was burning again. "I'll do it." The words left Diesel's mouth before he'd consciously decided to speak them. "I brought you here, kid. This mess is on me." Luna shook her head as she lit the first candle. "It doesn't work that way. The crossing has to be willing, but it also has to be chosen. By the demon. It picks who it wants to trade places with." The candle flame turned an unsettling shade of green. "And demons are smart. They always choose the one who'll hurt the most to lose." Sheriff Martinez felt ice form in his stomach as he watched Luna light the second candle. The implications of her words settled over them like a funeral shroud. The demon wouldn't take one of the Hell Angels, rough men who'd already lived hard lives on the margins. It wouldn't take him, a middle-aged lawman with no family and few friends. It would take the child. "No," the word exploded from Martinez's lips. "Absolutely not. There has to be another way." Luna's small hands never faltered as she lit the third candle. The green flames cast twisted shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. "There is no other way. I've known since the beginning that this was how it would end." She unwrapped the cloth bundle, revealing what looked like a small animal skull carved with intricate symbols. "My mother prepared me for this day. It's why she sent me with the angels, so I'd be here when the time came." The possessed donkey's voice rose above the town's chaos, but now it carried something new: anticipation, hunger, as if it could sense what was happening on the hill above. "Your mother knew?" Diesel's face had gone pale beneath his weathered tan. She knew this would happen? Luna placed the skull at the circle's center, and immediately the air around them began to thicken, taking on an almost liquid quality. She had the sight, saw what was coming to this place, saw what it would take to stop it. The child's voice remained steady, but Martinez caught the slight tremor in her hands. She made the choice any mother would make. She gave me the tools I'd need, and she let me go. The candle flames suddenly flared higher, casting the entire hilltop in an eerie green glow. From the skull came a low humming sound that seemed to resonate in their bones. In the distance, the possessed donkey's braying turned into something that might have been laughter. "It's starting," Luna whispered, and for the first time since they'd met her, she sounded like exactly what she was, a frightened child facing something too terrible for words. "Everyone needs to step back. Once I begin the incantation, the demon will come, and when it does, it won't be alone." The ancient ritual circle carved into the desert floor seemed to pulse with malevolent energy as Luna knelt at its center, her small hands trembling as she traced the intricate symbols with her fingertips. The possessed donkey's braying echoed across the wasteland, growing closer with each passing moment, while the remaining townspeople huddled behind makeshift barricades constructed from overturned cars and broken furniture. Sheriff Martinez wiped sweat from his brow, his rifle feeling inadequate against the supernatural threat bearing down on them. "How much time does she need?" he called out to Reaper, the grizzled Hell Angels president, who stood guard over the child like a stone sentinel. "As long as it takes," Reaper growled, his weathered face etched with concern. He'd seen Luna perform miracles before, but nothing on this scale. The price of banishing such a powerful demon would be steep, and he feared what it might cost the girl who'd become like a daughter to him. Luna's voice rose in an otherworldly chant, words in a language that predated human civilization spilling from her lips. The symbols around her began to glow with an eerie blue light, and the very air crackled with mystical energy. But something was wrong. The demon's influence was stronger than she'd anticipated, its roots deeper in this realm than any she'd encountered before. A thunderous crash shattered the evening silence as the possessed donkey burst through the town's outer defenses, its eyes burning like twin furnaces of hellfire. Where once it had been merely an animal driven to madness, it now stood nearly 8 feet tall, its form twisted and elongated by demonic power. Razor-sharp teeth gleamed in its elongated muzzle, and shadowy tendrils writhed around its muscular frame like living smoke. "Open fire!" Martinez shouted, and the desperate defenders unleashed everything they had. Bullets sparked harmlessly off the creature's hide while it charged forward, each hoofbeat leaving smoldering craters in the asphalt. Luna's chanting intensified, her voice carrying over the chaos of battle. Blood began to seep from the corners of her eyes as she pushed her abilities beyond safe limits, drawing power from sources that demanded payment in flesh and spirit. The ritual circle blazed brighter, but she could feel the demon fighting back, its consciousness pressing against her own like a crushing weight. Father Miguel clutched his rosary tighter as he watched the battle unfold from behind an overturned truck. The holy water and blessed silver had proven useless against this abomination, leaving them dependent on the mysterious child whose very existence challenged everything he believed about good and evil. Yet as he watched her sacrifice herself for people who'd shown her nothing but fear and suspicion, he began to understand that perhaps holiness could wear unexpected faces. The possessed donkey fixed its burning gaze on Luna and let out a roar that shattered windows for blocks around. It could sense the threat she posed, and its demonic passenger was not content to let her complete the banishment ritual. With supernatural speed, it bounded over the defenders' barricades, heading straight for the glowing circle. Reaper stepped into its path without hesitation, producing a massive chain from his leather jacket. The links had been blessed by a dozen different faiths and tempered in the fires of righteous fury. "You want her, you go through me first," he snarled, whipping the chain around the creature's neck as it lunged forward. The demon donkey thrashed wildly, its claws raking across Reaper's chest and drawing blood, but the grizzled biker held firm. His brothers in arms joined the fray, forming a protective circle around Luna as she fought her own battle against the demon's will. Luna felt the entity's presence like acid in her veins, burning away pieces of her humanity with each passing second. The price of banishment was becoming clear now. To send this demon back to hell, she would have to open a doorway within herself, allowing it to pass through her very soul. The process would leave her forever changed, marked by darkness in ways that could never be undone. But as she looked at the townspeople fighting desperately to protect her, saw Reaper bleeding to keep the monster at bay, and felt the weight of innocent lives hanging in the balance, Luna made her choice. She pressed her palms against the burning symbols and spoke the words that would complete the ritual, knowing full well what they would cost her. The demon's scream of rage and terror split the night as it felt the pull of the abyss calling it home. The possessed donkey's form began to dissolve, shadows peeling away like layers of rotten skin. But even as victory seemed within reach, Luna felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, a darkness taking root where her innocence had once lived. The ritual circle exploded outward in a burst of blinding light, and when the glow faded, only a normal donkey remained, confused and frightened but blessedly free. Luna swayed on her knees, her young face aged by the burden of what she'd absorbed, while around her the desert wind whispered secrets of damnation and redemption. The ancient symbols carved into the cave wall pulsed with an otherworldly light as Luna pressed her small palm against them. Each glyph seemed to writhe and shift under her touch, responding to something deep within her bloodline that even she didn't fully understand. "The binding ritual requires 3 elements," she whispered, her voice echoing off the cavern walls: blood of the innocent, flame of the willing, and the sacrifice of what matters most. Sheriff Martinez felt his stomach clench. Behind them, the sounds of destruction continued to echo from the town. The possessed donkey's rampage had intensified since they'd entered the caves. Windows shattered in the distance, followed by terrified screams that carried on the desert wind. What kind of sacrifice? Dr. Reeves stepped closer, his medical bag clutched tightly in his weathered hands. The veterinarian had seen enough death in his years, but something about the child's tone made his blood run cold. Luna's fingers traced the spiral pattern etched deepest into the stone. The demon feeds on chaos, on the terror it creates. To banish it, someone must willingly take its place in the void between worlds. Someone must become the anchor that holds the gateway closed. Father Miguel crossed himself, his lips moving in silent prayer. "There has to be another way, child. God wouldn't demand such a price." "Your God has no power here," Luna said, not unkindly. "This magic is older than your churches, older than your prayers. It comes from the time when angels walked the earth and demons ruled the spaces between stars." The ground beneath their feet trembled as something massive crashed into the general store above them. Dust rained from the ceiling, and Martinez could hear Mrs. Henderson screaming for her missing cat. "How do we know you're telling the truth?" Martinez demanded, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon, though he knew bullets would be useless against what they faced. "Maybe there's something you're not telling us." Luna turned from the wall, her eyes reflecting the supernatural light like mirrors. "Because my grandmother made the same choice 30 years ago. She bound a demon that was tearing apart a reservation in Nevada. The Hell Angels found me there, living alone in her trailer, speaking to shadows that no one else could see." The pieces began falling into place for Martinez. The girl's strange knowledge, her connection to the supernatural, the way the other bikers treated her with a mixture of fear and reverence. She passed her abilities to you. More than abilities, responsibilities. Luna pulled a jagged piece of obsidian from her jacket pocket. "The blood must be freely given, drawn with stone blessed by moonlight and pain." Without hesitation, she drew the sharp edge across her palm. Crimson drops fell onto the carved symbols, and the cave filled with a sound like distant thunder. The glyphs blazed brighter, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Now the flame. She looked at Father Miguel. "Light your candle, priest. Your faith, even if misplaced here, carries weight. Belief has power, regardless of its source." Miguel's hands shook as he struck a match. The small flame seemed to grow larger as it touched the wick, burning with an intensity that made them all step back. Luna guided his hand toward a small depression in the stone where the candle wax dripped and hissed against the ancient rock. The cave began to vibrate. a low humming that seemed to come from the earth itself. Outside, the donkey's braying took on a different tone, confused, angry, but somehow less feral than before. "It's working," Dr. Reeves breathed. But Luna shook her head. "This is just the beginning. The demon knows what we're doing now. It will fight back." She looked at each of them in turn. The final part requires someone to speak the binding words while standing in the circle. That person becomes the living seal. They don't die, but they don't exactly live either. They exist in the space between, keeping the gateway closed for as long as they endure. Martinez stepped forward. "I'll do it." No, the voice came from behind them. They turned to see Tank emerging from the cave entrance, his massive frame blocking most of the moonlight. Blood streaked his face from a dozen cuts, and his leather jacket hung in tatters. "This is Hell Angel's business. Always has been. Tank, you don't understand," Martinez began. "I understand plenty." The biker's eyes fixed on Luna with something approaching tenderness. "Been watching over this kid for 3 years, waiting for the day she'd have to make this choice. Didn't think it would be for a nothing town in the middle of nowhere, but fate's got a sense of humor." Luna's composed mask cracked for the first time since Martinez had met her. "You can't. You're not blood. The ritual won't accept a substitute." Tank smiled grimly. "Maybe not, but I can buy you time to find another way." He pulled a sawed-off shotgun from beneath his jacket. "That demon's riding something with 4 legs and bad attitude. Time to remind it what happens when you mess with our family." The sound of splintering wood echoed from above as something massive struck the cave entrance. The dust had settled around Ephraim, but the silence that followed was more unsettling than the creature's screams had been. Maya stood frozen in the center of the street, her small hands still glowing with residual power, while the townspeople emerged from their hiding places like prairie dogs after a storm. Sheriff Kowalski was the first to approach, his boots crunching on the crystallized sand that had once been the possessed donkey. He stopped a respectful distance from Maya, his weathered face showing a mixture of gratitude and deep unease. "It's over?" he asked, though his hand remained close to his weapon. Maya's eyes, still swirling with that otherworldly darkness, fixed on him. "The creature is gone. But the gateway—" She turned toward the old church at the end of Main Street. "It's still open." A collective shudder ran through the gathered crowd. Mrs. Henderson clutched her rosary tighter, while Doc Martinez stepped forward, his medical instincts overriding his fear. "Child, you need to rest. Whatever you just did—" "What I did was only the beginning," Maya interrupted, her voice carrying an authority that belonged to someone far older. "The donkey was just a scout, a test. There are things on the other side that make Ephraim look like a house cat." Jake revved his Harley, the engine's roar cutting through the tension. The other Hell Angels flanked him, their leather vests gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Then we close the damn thing," he growled. "Tell us what you need, little sister." Maya's expression softened slightly when she looked at him, and for a moment she looked like what she was, a frightened child in way over her head. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by grim determination. "Blood," she said simply. "Innocent blood, freely given. The gateway was opened with corruption and violence. To close it requires the opposite, purity and sacrifice." The sheriff's face darkened. "Now hold on there. We're not about to—" "My blood," Maya clarified. "I'm the only one here who qualifies. Despite everything I've done, everything I've become, I'm still—" She struggled with the words. "Clean enough." Doc Martinez stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "How much blood are we talking about here?" Maya's silence was answer enough. Jake killed his engine and swung off the bike in one fluid motion. "Like hell. There's got to be another way." "There is no other way!" Maya's shout echoed off the buildings, and several windows cracked under the force of her emotion. She took a shaky breath, visibly trying to control herself. "The ritual requires a life. That's how these things work. Balance. The universe demands its due." Father Rodriguez emerged from the crowd, his cassock dusty but his eyes clear. "Child, I've studied the old texts. Sometimes there are loopholes, alternative interpretations. Father, I appreciate your faith, but this isn't about interpretation. The mathematics of magic are absolute. Maya pulled a wicked-looking knife from her boot. Where had she gotten that? And the blade seemed to drink in the sunlight. The good news is, I'll probably take a lot of whatever's waiting on the other side with me. The bad news is, well, stop talking like you're already dead, Jake snapped, moving closer. We're family. Family doesn't abandon family. Family protects family, Maya countered. And sometimes that means making the hard choice. A low rumble began to emanate from the direction of the church. The ground beneath their feet started to vibrate, and the air itself seemed to thicken. In the distance, something howled, something that had never drawn breath in any earthly realm. "They're coming," Maya whispered, and for the first time since she'd arrived in town, she sounded truly afraid. The big guns, whatever's controlling this operation, just realized their advance scout failed. The howling grew closer, joined by other sounds, chittering, scraping, the wet slap of things that moved without legs. The church's bell tower began to glow with sickly green light. Sheriff Kowalski drew his weapon, though they all knew it would be useless. "How long do we have?" Maya closed her eyes, listening to something only she could hear. Minutes, maybe less. She looked up at Jake, and her expression was heartbreakingly young. "I'm scared." Jake knelt down and pulled her into a fierce hug. "I know, little sister, I know. But you're not doing this alone. Jake, no. You can't. Not dying with you, dummy. Living with you." He pulled back and grinned, though his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You said you need innocent blood freely given, right? Well, what if we give it? All of us. Not enough to kill, but enough to share the load." Maya blinked, her supernatural composure cracking. That might actually work. If enough people participated, the burden would be distributed. But the pain would be shared too, and if anyone backs out once we start, then we all die anyway, Doc Martinez said grimly. "Sounds like our best option just became our only option." The howling was definitely closer now. The possessed donkey's screams echoed across the desert as Maya pressed her small hands against its writhing form, dark energy crackling between her fingers like black lightning. The creature's eyes had gone completely white, foam pouring from its mouth as demonic whispers poured from its throat in languages that predated human speech. "Hold it steady!" Maya shouted over the supernatural wind that had begun swirling around them, lifting sand and debris into a miniature cyclone. Sheriff Martinez and 3 of the remaining Hell Angels bikers struggled to keep the thrashing animal pinned, while Maya worked her terrible magic. Father Rodriguez knelt nearby, clutching his rosary so tightly that blood seeped between his knuckles. "Child, whatever you're doing, it's tearing a hole in the fabric of reality itself. I can feel it. Something else is trying to come through." Maya's face had gone deathly pale, veins of shadow creeping up her neck like infected roots. "I know," she gasped, "but this is the only way. The demon isn't just possessing the donkey, it's using the animal as an anchor to manifest fully in this realm. I have to sever that connection before it completes the ritual." Above them, storm clouds gathered despite the clear desert sky moments before. Lightning flashed in impossible colors, purple, green, silver, each strike illuminating the town of Salvation Flats in stark, otherworldly relief. Windows began exploding in sequence down Main Street as the supernatural pressure built. "Maya!" Jake's voice cut through the chaos as he stumbled toward them, one arm hanging useless at his side from his earlier encounter with the demon. "The other animals, they're all converging on the church. Whatever you're doing, it's calling to every dark thing within 50 miles. She didn't look up, couldn't afford to break concentration now. The exorcism ritual she'd learned from the Hell Angels' forbidden grimoire required absolute focus, and she was already pushing her 12-year-old body far beyond its limits. Dark blood trickled from her nose and ears. "Almost there," Maya whispered, her voice harmonizing with itself in disturbing ways. The shadow veins spread further up her face, and for a moment her own eyes flashed white like the donkey's. "I can see it," The demon's true form. It's beautiful and horrible and ancient beyond measure. The possessed donkey's struggles suddenly intensified, its hooves striking sparks against the stone. Then, impossibly, it began to speak in perfect cultured English. "Little witch child, you have no idea what forces you're meddling with. Release me, and I will grant your heart's deepest desire, the power to save everyone you've ever failed to protect." Maya's hands trembled. For just an instant, the magical barrier around her flickered, and everyone saw the truth written across her young features, the terrible burden of responsibility, the crushing weight of being the only thing standing between her town and damnation. "I know what you are," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "And I know what I have to give up to stop you." "Maya, no!" Martinez lunged forward, but invisible force threw him backward. "Whatever it's asking for, there has to be another way." But the child was already making the choice. She pressed her palms flat against the donkey's heaving sides and spoke a single word in the Hell Angel's dark tongue, a word that made reality shudder and crack like broken glass. The change was immediate and horrifying. The shadows consuming Maya's face suddenly reversed course, flowing down her arms and into the possessed animal. The donkey's screams reached an impossible crescendo before cutting off abruptly, its body going completely rigid. For a heartbeat, perfect silence fell over the desert. Even the supernatural wind died away. Then the donkey simply collapsed. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, just folded in on itself like a discarded puppet, utterly lifeless. The white fire in its eyes guttered out, leaving only the ordinary brown eyes of a terrified animal that had never asked to be part of this nightmare. Maya swayed on her feet, the shadow veins fading from her skin, but leaving her somehow diminished, as if a vital part of her had been permanently drained away. When she looked up at the gathered adults, her eyes held a terrible new knowledge. "It's done," she whispered. "The demon is bound inside me now instead of trying to manifest through the animals. It can't hurt anyone else. Bound inside you?" Father Rodriguez struggled to his feet, horror dawning on his weathered face. "Child, what have you done? That's not an exorcism. That's possession by invitation. You've made yourself the host." Maya nodded slowly, already backing away from them with the instinctive fear of a cornered animal. "I won't let it use me to hurt people. I'll go into the desert, far from everyone, and I'll hold it trapped until—" "Until what?" Martinez demanded. "Until it drives you mad? Until it corrupts your soul completely?" "This isn't salvation, Maya. This is sacrifice." The child who had saved them all smiled sadly, ancient wisdom burning in her two young eyes. "Sometimes they're the same thing, Sheriff." The ancient ritual circle carved into the hard-pan desert floor pulsed with ethereal blue light as Maya knelt at its center, her small hands pressed against the scorched earth. Around her, the surviving townspeople formed a protective ring, their faces gaunt with exhaustion and terror. Sheriff Martinez clutched his useless rifle, while Dr. Hernandez tended to the wounded with trembling hands. The possessed donkey stood 20 yards away, its eyes burning like crimson coals in the pre-dawn darkness. The creature that had once been Pancho snorted and pawed the ground, steam rising from its matted hide. The demon inside had grown stronger with each life it claimed, and now it seemed to tower over them all, a nightmare-given flesh. Maya's leather jacket, adorned with the Hell Angel's patch her father had died wearing, hung loose on her thin frame. She whispered words in a language that predated human civilization, syllables that made the air itself recoil. Blood trickled from her nose as she channeled power that no 13-year-old should possess. "The binding is almost complete," she called out without turning around. "But the demon won't go quietly. It knows what's coming." As if responding to her words, the possessed donkey let out a shriek that shattered every remaining window in the abandoned gas station behind them. It charged forward, hooves striking sparks from the stone. Old Miguel stepped into its path, raising the blessed crucifix Father Santos had given him before the priest's death 3 nights ago. "En el nombre del Padre," he shouted, his voice cracking with age and fear. The creature slammed into an invisible barrier inches from the cross, its momentum sending it tumbling backward. But even as it rolled, the demon was changing its host. Pancho's familiar brown coat darkened to midnight black, and bone spurs erupted from his shoulders and skull. The transformation was killing the animal, but the demon didn't care about preserving its vessel anymore. "It's burning through the host," Maya gasped, her small body convulsing as she maintained the ritual. "If Pancho dies while the demon is still inside him, it'll be free to possess anyone it wants." Sheriff Martinez stepped closer to the circle's edge. "What do you need us to do?" "Nothing," Maya replied, and there was something terrible in her voice. "This is the price I told you about. The binding requires a willing soul to serve as anchor. Someone has to go down with the demon." The sheriff's blood turned to ice. "Maya, no. There has to be another way." "There isn't." She turned to face him, and her eyes had taken on the same blue glow as the ritual circle. "I've known since the beginning. My father made this same choice 20 years ago in Bakersfield. The Hell Angels aren't just a motorcycle club, Sheriff. We're guardians. We hold the line against things like this." The possessed donkey had regained its footing and was circling the group now, testing the barriers Maya had erected. Each pass brought it closer as her strength waned. Dr. Hernandez looked up from bandaging Mrs. Valdez's torn arm. "If you die, who's going to stop the next one? These things will keep coming." A sad smile crossed Maya's blood-streaked face. "That's the beautiful thing about sacrifice, Doc. It echoes. My father's death saved hundreds, and his sacrifice gave me the power to save you all. Someday, maybe someone will carry on what I started here." The demon sensed the conversation and pressed its attack, hurling itself against Maya's defenses with increasing fury. Each impact sent shockwaves through the ritual circle, and cracks began appearing in the carved symbols. "I need you all to remember something," Maya said, her voice barely audible over the demon's roars. "When people ask what happened here, don't let them turn this into some ghost story. Don't let them forget that evil is real, but so is the willingness to stand against it." She pressed her palms together and spoke the final words of the binding. The ritual circle erupted in blinding light, and ethereal chains burst from the earth to wrap around both Maya and the possessed donkey. The demon's shrieks reached a pitch that made everyone cover their ears, but Maya stood calmly as the supernatural bonds tightened around her small frame. "Tell my Uncle Johnny that I kept the faith," she said to Sheriff Martinez. "Tell him the Hell Angels still ride." The light intensified until it became unbearable, and then everything went silent. When their vision cleared, the ritual circle was nothing but a patch of glass-smooth stone. Maya and the creature were gone, leaving only the acrid smell of brimstone and the soft desert wind. In the distance, a motorcycle engine rumbled to life, though no bike was visible on the empty highway. The sound faded slowly, like a prayer carried away by the dawn. The possessed donkey's eyes blazed crimson in the pre-dawn darkness as it faced down the small group gathered in the town square. Behind Raven, the Hell Angels' motorcycles sat silent, their chrome reflecting the otherworldly glow. The child stepped forward, her leather jacket hanging loose on her small frame, the ritual dagger gleaming in her pale hand. "You don't have to do this," Sheriff Martinez called out, his voice hoarse from the night's chaos. Around them, the desert town of Perdition lay in ruins, shattered storefronts, overturned cars, and the acrid smell of sulfur hanging in the air like a funeral shroud. Raven turned, her ancient eyes meeting his. For a moment, she looked like what she was, an 11-year-old girl carrying burdens no child should bear. There's no other way. The binding requires a willing soul, freely given. My soul. The donkey, once a gentle creature named Pablo who had carried children at the annual fair, pawed the ground with hooves that now left smoldering marks in the asphalt. The demon inhabiting its flesh had grown stronger throughout the night, feeding on terror and destruction. It had taken 3 lives already, and Raven knew it wouldn't stop until the entire town was consumed. "The ritual has to be completed before sunrise," she continued, glancing at the horizon where the faintest hint of light threatened to break. "After that, the demon will be too powerful to contain." Her father, Big Mike, dismounted from his Harley and approached slowly. His weathered face, usually hard as granite, showed cracks of vulnerability. "Baby girl, there's got to be another way. I can't lose you too." "You lost me the day Mom died in that ritual," Raven replied, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "I've been living on borrowed time ever since." The truth hung between them like a blade. Sarah Williams, Raven's mother, had sacrificed herself 3 years ago to banish a different demon, one that had been hunting their daughter specifically. The Hell Angels weren't just a motorcycle club, they were guardians, protectors against supernatural threats that plagued the desert borderlands. And Raven wasn't just any child, she was a conduit, born with the ability to channel otherworldly energies. The possessed donkey charged suddenly, its braying transformed into an inhuman shriek. Raven sidestepped with unnatural grace, the dagger singing through the air to slice across the creature's flank. Black ichor sprayed from the wound, hissing where it hit the ground. "I bind you by blood," she shouted, her voice carrying power that made the very air tremble. "I bind you by will, I bind you by sacrifice." The demon fought back, lashing out with hooves that cracked concrete. One caught Raven across the ribs, sending her sprawling. Blood trickled from her lips, but she struggled to her feet, never letting go of the dagger. "And I bind you by love," she cried, the final words of the ancient incantation. The ritual circle carved into the asphalt began to glow with silver light. The demon screamed as ethereal chains wrapped around the donkey's form, but it wasn't enough. The binding wavered, threatening to snap. "It needs more power," Dr. Elena Santos called from where she crouched beside the wounded. The town's physician had seen enough supernatural incidents to recognize the signs. "The sacrifice isn't complete." Raven raised the dagger to her own throat, but Big Mike lunged forward, catching her wrist. "No, I won't let you." "Together then," Raven whispered, looking into her father's eyes, like it should have been from the beginning. Understanding passed between them. Big Mike nodded slowly, his massive hand covering hers on the dagger's hilt. "Together, baby girl." They pressed the blade to their joined palms, letting their blood drip into the ritual circle. Father and daughter, united in sacrifice. The silver light exploded outward, washing over the demon with purifying fire. The creature's final scream shattered windows, 3 blocks away before cutting off abruptly. When the light faded, Pablo the donkey lay unconscious but breathing normally, his eyes clear of demonic influence. Raven collapsed into her father's arms, alive but forever changed. The ritual had taken something from both of them, a piece of their souls bound now to the cosmic forces that kept such demons at bay. Sheriff Martinez approached cautiously, hardly believing the nightmare was over. "Is it finished?" "For now," Big Mike replied, stroking his daughter's dark hair. "But there will always be others." As the sun crested the horizon, painting the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the Hell Angels prepared to leave. Perdition was safe, but the road called to them, an endless highway where guardians rode between the world of the living and the realm of shadows. Raven climbed onto her father's bike, no longer the mysterious child who had arrived in darkness, but a true Hell Angel, baptized by fire and blood. Behind them, Pablo opened his eyes and brayed softly, the gentle sound of a creature at peace. The engines roared to life, carrying them toward whatever darkness awaited down the road.